A winter's night. Halku came in and said to his wife,
The landlord's come. Get the money you set aside. I'll get along without it.
Muni had been sweeping. She turned around and said,
But there are only 3 rupees. If you give them to him, where's the blanket going to come from? How are you going to get through these January nights in the fields? Tell him we'll pay him after the harvest, not right now.
For a moment, Halku stood hesitating. Without a blanket he couldn't possibly sleep in the fields at night. But the landlord wouldn't be put off. He'd threaten and insult him. So what did it matter if he died in the cold weather? Trying to coax his wife, Halku said,
Come on, give it to me. I'll figure out some other plan.
Her eyes angry, Muni said,
You've already tried some other plan. Just tell me what other plan you have. Is somebody going to give you a blanket? We are already heavily in debt and we can't pay it off. What I say is, give up this tenant farming. The work's killing you. Whatever you harvest goes to pay the arrears, so why you do not give it up? Were we born just to keep paying off debts? Earn some money for your own belly, give up this kind of farming. I won't give you the money, I won't.
Sadly, Halku said,
Then I'll have to put up with his abuse.
Losing her temper, Muni said,
Why should he abuse you? Is this his kingdom?
But as she said it, she stopped frowning. The bitter truth in Halku's words completely dampened her spirit. She went to the niche in the wall, took out the money and handed it over to Halku.
Give up this kind of farming,
she insisted.
If you work as a hired laborer, we'll at least get enough food to eat. No one will be yelling insults at you. You farm someone else's land. Whatever you earn, you give it back to him and get insulted in the bargain.
Halku took the money. It seemed as if he were tearing his heart out and giving it away. They'd saved the money, piece by piece, for his blanket. Today, he was going to throw it away. With every step, his head sunk lower under the burden of his poverty. A dark January night. In the sky, even the stars seemed to be shivering. At the edge of his field, underneath a shelter of cane leaves, Halku lay on a bamboo cot wrapped up in his old shawl, shivering. Underneath the cot his friend, Jabra the dog, was whimpering with his muzzle pressed into his belly. Neither one of them was able to sleep. Halku curled up, drawing his knees close against his chin, and said,
Cold, Jabra, didn't I tell you in the house that you could lie in the paddy straw? So why did you come out here? Now you'll have to bear the cold. There's nothing I can do.
Jabra wagged his tail without getting up, protracted his whimpering into a long yawn, and was silent. Perhaps in his canine wisdom he guessed that his whimpering was keeping his master awake. Halku reached out his hand and patted Jabra's cold back.
From tomorrow, stop coming with me or the cold will get you. This west wind comes from nobody knows where, bringing the icy cold with it. Let me get up and fill my pipe. Somehow we'll get through the night. This is the reward you get for farming, while some lucky fellows are sleeping in their houses under good, thick quilts. Fate is strange. While we do the hard work, somebody else reaps the rewards.
He got up, took some embers from the pit, and filled his pipe. Jabra got up too. Smoking, Halku said,
If you smoke, the cold's just as bad, but at least you feel a little better.
Jabra looked at him, eyes overflowing with love.
You have to put up with just one more cold night. Tomorrow I'll spread some straw. When you lie down in that, You won't feel the cold so much.
Jabra put his paws on Halku's knees and brought his muzzle close. Halku felt his warm breath. After he finished smoking, Halku lay down and made up his mind to sleep. But he couldn't. He turned from side to side. The cold continued to torment him. When he could no longer bear it, he gently picked Jabra up and, patting his head, got him to fall asleep in his lap. The dog's body gave off a kind of stink, but Halku, hugging him tight, experienced a happiness he hadn't felt for months. Halku embraced him affectionately as he would a brother or a friend. He didn't resent his stink. This singular friendship warmed his whole being. Suddenly Jabra picked up the noise of some animal. This special intimacy with his master had produced a new alertness in him that ignored the bite of the cold wind. Springing up, he ran out of the shelter and began to bark. Halku whistled and called him several times. But Jabra did not listen to him. He went on barking. He would come back for a moment, then dashed off again. The sense of duty had taken possession of him. Another hour passed. The cold increased. Halku sat up, and bringing both knees tight against his chest, hid his face between them, but the cold was just as biting. It seemed as though all his blood had frozen, that ice rather than blood filled his veins. He leaned back to look at the skies. How much of the night was still left? Night was not even 3 hours gone. Only a stone's throw from Halku's field there was a mango grove. The leaves had begun to fall, and they were lying in a heap. Halku thought,
If I go and make a pile of leaves, I can light a fire and keep myself warm. If anybody sees me gathering the leaves in the dead of night, they'll think it's a ghost.
He ripped up some stalks from a nearby field, made a broom out of them, and, picking up a lighted cow dung cake, went towards the grove. Jabra watched him coming and ran to him wagging his tail. Halku said,
I couldn't stand it anymore, Jabra. Come along. Let's go into the orchard and gather some leaves to warm ourselves. When we're toasted, we'll come back and sleep. The night's still far from over.
Jabra barked his agreement and trotted on toward the orchard. Under the trees it was pitch dark, and in the darkness the bitter wind blew, buffeting the leaves, and drops of dew dripped from the branches. Jabra had found a bone lying somewhere, and he was chewing on it. Halku began to gather the leaves. In a little while he had a great heap. His hands were frozen, his bare feet numb. But he'd piled up a regular mountain of the dry leaves, and by making a fire he'd drive away the cold. In a little while the fire was burning merrily. The flames leapt upward, licking at the overhanging branches. In the flickering light the immense trees of the grove looked as though they were carrying the vast darkness on their heads. Halku sat before the fire and let it warm him. After a while he took off his shawl and tucked it behind him. Then he spread out both feet as though challenging the cold to do its worst. Victorious over the immense power of the winter, he could not repress his pride in his triumph. He said to Jabra,
Well, Jabra, you're not cold now, are you? We should have thought of this plan before.
Jabra wagged his tail. The leaves were all burned up. Darkness covered the orchard again. Under the ashes a few embers smoldered, and when a gust of wind blew over them, they stirred up briefly and then flickered out again. Halku wrapped himself up in his shawl again and sat by the warm ashes, humming a tune. The fire had warmed him through and he felt drowsy. Jabra gave a loud bark and ran toward the field. Halku realized that this meant a pack of wild animals had probably broken into the field. They might be wild cattle. He distinctly heard the noise of them moving around. Then it seemed to him they were grazing. He could hear the sound of nibbling. He thought,
No, with Jabra around, no animal can get into the field. He'd rip it to shreds. I must have been mistaken. Now there's no sound at all. I must have been mistaken.
He shouted.
Jabra, Jabra.
Jabra went on barking and did not come to him. Again there was a sound of munching and crunching in the field. He could not have been mistaken this time. It really hurt to think about getting up from where he was. It was so comfortable there that it seemed intolerable to go to the field in this cold and chase animals. He didn't stir. He only shouted at the top of his lungs,
Hello, hello, hello.
Jabra started barking again. There were animals eating his field just when the crop was ready. What a fine crop it was! And these cursed animals were destroying it. With a firm resolve he got up and took a few steps. But suddenly a blast of icy wind pierced him like the sting of a scorpion. He went back, sat by the extinguished fire and stirred up the ashes to warm his chilled body. Jabra was barking his lungs out, the while cattle were devastating his field, and Halku went on sitting peacefully near the warm ashes. His drowsiness held him motionless. Wrapped in his shawl, he fell asleep on the warmed ground near the ashes. When he woke up in the morning, the sun was high, and Munni was saying,
Do you think you're going to sleep all day? You came out here and lit a fire while the whole field was being flattened.
Halku got up and said,
Then you've just come from the field.
Yes, it's all ruined. And you could sleep like that?
Halku sought an excuse.
I nearly died and just managed to get through the night, and you worry about your crop. I had such a pain in my belly that I can't describe it.
Then the two of them walked to the edge of their land. He looked. The whole field had been trampled, and Jabra was stretched out as though he were dead. They continued to stare at the ruined field. Moni's face was shadowed with grief, but Halku was content. Muni said,
Now you'll have to hire yourself out to earn some money to pay off the rent and taxes.
With a contented smile, Halku said,
But I won't have to sleep nights out here in the cold.